Hello, this is Lauren from therawkey.com, where we teach you how to heal your companions by working with the body and returning to the natural species-appropriate diet. Today we will be talking about weight issues, specifically how do you know if your dog is underweight, overweight, or their ideal weight. Most people only experience seeing overweight or obese kibble-fed dogs, so when you start to feed a natural diet, it can be hard to tell if you're underfeeding or if your dog's hourglass figure is actually healthy and appropriate. Being overweight significantly shortens our dogs' and cats' lives, and being underweight from underfeeding can lead to behavior issues, chronic symptoms, and eventually starvation. So it's important that we have a solid picture of what a healthy weight looks like. Today we'll be covering dogs, but the same general principles will apply to cats as well. I will be recording a video on cats' weight very soon, so if you're interested in specifics for cats or more videos about how to have the healthiest companions, please hit subscribe now. And if you find this video helpful, please hit the like button and consider sharing so more people can see it. In today's video, we're going to cover how to determine if your dog is underweight, overweight, or a healthy weight, with pictures of healthy weight dogs to give you reference. We're also going to cover general feeding percentages and how we've determined them, what to do if your dog is overweight, and what to do if your dog is underweight. We're also going to discuss the concept of free feeding, what it is, how to do it, and how to be successful at it. And we're also going to talk a little bit about being flexible and adjusting on the fly, as well as troubleshooting when your dog is not gaining weight. Jumping right in, let's talk about the key indicators for a healthy weight dog. So if you're looking at your dog from above, you should be able to see a clearly defined waist. We should be seeing the dog's shape as wider at the rib cage and narrower at the hip, with a slight hourglass figure. Looking from the side, we should see a clear angle from the ribs up to the hips, and we do not want to see any squares. So looking from the top or from the side, our dogs should not be boxes. They should have a nice curved figure. In our first example, I want to show you exactly what an ideal weight looks like. So this is Molly, and if you look at the picture on the right, you can see that there is a wider at the rib cage, narrower at the hips, with a noticeable but not severe curve in at the waist. That's your hourglass figure. You also notice that the hip bones, you can determine where they are, but they are not protruding. And you can clearly see where the spine is, but it's not protruding aside from the very top of the arch. Looking at the picture on the left, you can see at the top arch of the back 3 to 4 spine bones that are clearly visible. You can see that the rib cage angles upward to the hip bones. And most importantly, there's no squares. Our dogs are not blocky. We never want to see a square from above where the rib cage and the hips are the same width, or from the side view, we never want to see a straight line going from the rib cage to the back hips. Okay, and here's another example of a healthy weight dog. This is Charlie, and if you're looking at that top picture, you can clearly see the angle going from the rib cage up to the hips. There's no squares there. It's a nice sharp angle going up. And then if you look at the lower picture, you can see the hourglass figure. There's a nice swoop on the side there, coming in at the waist and then going slightly back out on the hips. Okay, for our next picture, we've got a larger dog. This is Sammy. He's a roughly 70 to 75 pound Staffordshire Terrier. And you can see the same shape where we've got the rib cage angling up to the hips. you can see the arch of the back, and you can just barely make out the spine bones. This picture is a little bit blurry, so it's not really easy to see the spine bones, but they are right at the top of the arch, about 3 or 4 is visible. And here, looking at a top-down view, we can see a even better illustration of that hourglass figure. You can clearly see that the rib cage is wider. We curve in at the waist, and then the hip bone is slightly protruding. And you can see how some of the dogs have different shapes in terms of how wide the rib cage and how narrow the hips. So on younger dogs and certain breeds, there'll be quite a bit more muscle mass on those back legs. The first picture that we showed with Molly, she's a senior, so she's going to have narrower hips than a younger dog. So if your dog has a little bit wider at the hips, that's fine, but we just want to make sure that we see that hourglass figure. And here we've just got a little video clip of Sammy, and again you can clearly see the nice angle up from the rib cage, and then looking at it from above, that nice hourglass figure. Now for our longer furred dogs, it gets a little bit harder to tell what's going on, especially if you've got a dog like a shepherd or a husky where their coat is very thick and very fluffy. In that case, you're going to want to use your hands to check the shape and see if the angles are there, make sure that the hips aren't protruding. Here in this picture of Callie, you'll notice that on Callie, she's a smaller dog, so our angles are not as pronounced as the bigger dogs might be. Also, some dogs have slightly different shapes, so you'll see that Callie doesn't have quite as wide of a rib cage compared to Molly, and so it's a little bit more of a straight line, but you can still very clearly see that there is a wider rib cage, an indent for the waistline, and then going back out at the hips. And again, Callie is a long-haired Chihuahua, so she's got quite a bit of fur that's covering up the hip and spine. But when you rub your hand down her spine, you can clearly feel those 3 vertebrae at the top of her spine, but not any further down. And you can clearly palpate the hip bones, but you're not seeing them protruding, you're not feeling them protruding. Next, we want to look at dogs that are slightly underweight and discuss reasons why a dog might be underweight that are valid and reasons that are not valid. When you transition to the natural diet and start the healing process, it is very likely that your dog will go through 1 or more healing events. These are also known as a healing crisis, and they typically occur in the first 1 to 3 years. These events will typically last anywhere from a few days to a few weeks, but sometimes they do continue on for a few months. During this time, you may choose to fast your dog in order to improve symptoms, or your dog may choose to voluntarily fast as its own body and instincts kick in to speed up the healing process. When fasting, your dog will definitely lose weight, but they should not lose weight excessively. And weight loss should not continue for months on end. It should be contained within that fasting period. The next few slides will show you what it looks like to be acceptably underweight following a healing event or a fast. And then after that, we will look at photos of dogs that are being chronically underfed or are underweight for other reasons, and I'll explain those reasons in the upcoming slides. Our first slide here is Fritzy. Now, Fritzy in this picture is slightly underweight. This was following a few weeks of eating watermelon only and some water fasting in order to heal his eye. He was having a detox event through his eye. So In this photo, you can notice that the spine is slightly above the rib cage, so it's clearly visible on both sides. The hip bones are also protruding. You can see the shadow of them at the back, showing that they are roughly half an inch above where we want to see them. But you look at the legs, he's still maintaining good muscle mass in those back legs. The next 3 slides, we will look at weight changes during a healing event, including a period of fasting. In this first slide, we can see that Emmy has a little more spine protruding than the younger dogs. This is in part because of her age. Older dogs tend to run leaner, but her hips are still covered, so this is okay. Also, Emmy spent most of her life living with 40 other Chihuahuas in a Winnebago, so during that time she developed spine and leg issues, which healed significantly on the natural diet, but her spine remained slightly more hunched despite her walk drastically improving. In these next pictures, we are about 3 weeks into a 5-week healing event. The healing event started with some vomiting, mucus in the stool, and bloody stool. Mucus is very common in a healing vent as it is the way the body expels waste and harmful materials. Mucus can show up in the stool, urine, ears, eyes, nose, and gums. The thicker and darker the mucus, the older the waste. We always celebrate when we see mucus because this means the body is healing. Sometimes the material that the body is pushing out is highly irritating, and that's why we may see bloody stool or blood in the urine. There's nothing to be concerned about in terms of that. It is just from the irritation, and it will clear up as soon as the old waste has been eliminated. During this healing event, Emmy first started to eat less, typically about half her normal portion. She then self-fasted for 5 days, refusing all food. During this time, she slept most of the day, occasionally moving from her dog bed indoors to a sunny spot outdoors. She drank very little water, and we left her as undisturbed as possible. You can see in the picture on the right that significantly more rib cage is showing in this healing event. This does not always occur during a healing event, but it is a common occurrence. Following the completion of the healing event, you can see from these photos that the weight returns rather quickly. It often takes a few days of small meals for digestion to ramp up before they are digesting well and eating full meals. During this time, they may only eat 1/4 or half their normal portion. Once I see that they're digesting all meals well, I will increase their portion and feed extra meat meals in order to get their weight back up to a suitable level. I continue with the extra meat meals and larger portions until they have returned to their pre-fasting weight, as long as their digestion remains suitable. Unfortunately, in some raw feeding and detox groups, there has been very bad information being put out about symptoms being the result of overfeeding, and that remaining thin for long periods is a normal part of detox. I want to make exceptionally clear that this is not detox and this is not healing. If your dog looks anything close to these pictures, this is starvation and your dog is in danger. Chronic starvation can lead to long-term health damage, so if you find your dog is not gaining weight, please reach out for help or take them to a vet for a diagnostic to rule out obstruction or some other condition that might result in serious weight loss. Also, please note that none of the dogs in these particular pictures were fed a raw or natural diet. These pictures are from rescue operations where the dogs were fed very small amounts of kibble, no food at all, or the dog was rescued from the streets. Now, looking at these pictures, some warning signs that we can look into for our dogs are the protruding hip bones. And you can see in the top right picture is the clearest, how the hip bones are clearly visible above the spine, above the skin line. We do not want to see that at all. Next would be the rib cage. Looking at the rib cage, anything more than 3 or 4 ribs being visible is moving to underweight. So you want to keep your ideally 3 or 4 ribs at the back half of the rib cage visible, but anything beyond that you want to give them an increase in their food, get their weight back up. Also, note how the spine is clearly visible on 3 sides. That is a really big warning sign that your dog is starving. We never want to see that spine on the sides. Ideally, we want to see just the very tips of 3 or 4 spine bones at the peak of the back. We don't want to be able to see the entire spine. We don't want to be able to see the back half of the spine. We only want to be able to see just 2 or 3, maybe 4 spine bones at the very top. So the only time where we might see the sides of the spine would be in the final weeks of life of a senior dog that is preparing to pass naturally. Other than that, we should never see the sides of the spinal column in our dogs. Another point of note is the skull in the bottom photo. In a healthy weight dog, the skull is rounded. Here in this starved dog, you can see the muscle on the top of the head has been used for fuel, and the skull comes to a point. And then also looking at the shoulders, the shoulder bones at the front can also be seen, and this would be a very clear indication that your dog is starving and not detoxing. Now, please do not let anyone tell you that this is detox. Don't let anyone tell you that you just need to get used to having a skinny dog. This is starvation, not detox. This is a result of chronic underfeeding, and adjustments need to be made to your portions immediately to save your dog's lives. Then we're going to cover portion sizes in a few moments and how to make adjustments. So if your dog is underweight or you're concerned that your dog is starving, please stay tuned to the end. We'll talk about that a bit more. Or reach out to me. I am always happy to help. If you reach out to me, your privacy will be 100% protected. Our only concern is getting your dog healthy. No judgment. We just want healthy dogs. Aside from feeding too small of portions and too few meat meals, feeding cooked foods like sweet potatoes, quinoa, cooked squashes, peas, lentils, beans, etc. can lead to this level of chronic starvation even if you are giving normal-sized meals. Alongside this, you may see itching, hair loss, ear issues, and other symptoms, which could be confused with detox, but are a result of the cooked foods, not the body healing. This is because the cooked foods keep the bowels in a state of chronic irritation, leading to malabsorption. The body is unable to get the nutrition from its raw meals because it is dealing with the chronic irritation of bouncing back and forth between cooked and raw. Please note that the natural diet is a raw diet and does not include cooked foods. While some people may choose to lightly steam some vegetables, it is our preference to keep foods completely raw because dogs do not have the ability to light a fire or turn on the stove. They cannot create their own cooked foods, and therefore their physiology was never designed to handle or process those foods. The inclusion of cooked foods will lead to chronic symptoms, and if you're trying to heal your dog, the last thing you want to do is keep your dog in a state of chronic irritation. In this last slide, I want to give you a visual comparison of what a dog looks like post-healing with fasting versus what a dog looks like under chronic starvation. Weight loss due to fasting will return shortly after the fasting is completed. Chronic starvation, on the other hand, is when they are continuing to slowly lose weight over months and years. If your dog is continuing to lose weight and continues to have symptoms, This means increased portions are needed. This is not detox. They should not be getting excessively thin at any point during the healing process. Okay, let's talk about some generalities in terms of how much food we should be feeding our dogs. So whenever we're judging our percentages for feeding, we are always trying to estimate their ideal weight. You may be off by 5 or 10 pounds, but try to get as close as possible to what you believe their ideal weight is, and then you can always adjust up or down as needed as you get closer to their ideal weight. Now, you'll note that we have 3 separate delineations: small dogs, medium dogs, and large dogs. Large dogs are much more fuel efficient than small dogs. Small dogs burn through much more calories per pound than large dogs do. You'll also note that all of our feeding percentages are within certain ranges, and these are your average ranges, but your dog in particular may need less or more based on their activity levels and their age. These are all starting percentages, and they are meant to be flexible as you see your dog's weight going up or down. You make adjustments as needed. Another thing to take into consideration when you're looking at the feeding percentages is how many meat days you are feeding versus how many fruit days you're feeding. For example, if you are feeding a small dog, you will see that the range is between 6% and 10%. And this range can, in very small dogs, go as high as 12 or 15%. So if you find that you have some of the very small Chihuahuas, the Yorkies, Maltese, some of the micro breeds, you may find that even at 10% they are losing weight and that you need to go a little bit higher. But if you are feeding 4 fruit days and 2 meat days, you're going to need a higher percentage than if you're feeding 2 fruit days and 4 meat days. Meat is much more calorie dense per ounce, and fruit obviously is much less calorie dense per ounce. So if you're feeding a lot of fruit, you need larger portions to gain larger quantities of calories. And if you're feeding lots of meat, then you are getting in much greater quantities of calories, and therefore you can do smaller percentages. So this is why we always work within a range and then make adjustments up and down as needed. All of these percentages are based on my personal experience with 125 fosters. We're actually over 130 fosters now, as well as helping clients. Percentages are a starting point and should be adjusted up or down as needed to maintain the appropriate weight, as shown in the previous slides. Remember that first slide with Molly? That's our ideal. That's what we're looking for. So if your dog is starting out overweight, you may start on the lower end of percentages, and then once they reach that ideal, you will slowly increase until you find the amount that allows them to maintain that weight without gaining. What to do if your dog is overweight. So if your dog is starting out from a position of needing to lose weight, which this is where the majority of people coming from kibble, canned food, or commercial raw food is going to find themselves with an overweight dog. So we can start out early with lots of fruit days, and then as the weight comes down, gradually add in more meat days. That's my preference when taking in the rescue dogs, because it also helps to establish their eating of the fruits, and it avoids them holding out for meat days, and it also avoids you overfeeding meat. You can cut the portions back as low as 2 to 5% until the ideal weight is reached, and then gradually increase 1% at a time until you find that right percentage that helps them maintain an ideal weight. You can also add in extra fasting days, or you can choose watery fruits like melons over denser fruits. And of course, always increasing their exercise is an excellent addition to the dietary changes. Okay, now if your dog is underweight, and this is less common, but it can occur on kibble-fed dogs that are dealing with IBS. It can also occur if you've been on a different raw diet and they've been dealing with malabsorption or digestion issues. So the first thing we want to do is look at our different options. So we have different options based on how well they digest meat. If their meat meals are digesting well, then you can simply increase the number of meat days or feed all meat days until they get close to the ideal weight, and then add back fruit days once the ideal weight is reached. You can also increase their meat portions and increase portions across all meals. Now, if their meat is not digesting well, you can try adding digestive enzymes to assist with the meat digestion. You can try grinding the meat. Oftentimes, when their digestion is weak, grinding the meat will be enough to have solid stool and get everything digested. But if you're finding that neither of those work for you, and always give at least 2 weeks to test. But if you find that that is not working, your dog is still having diarrhea or soft stool, or they're throwing up on meat days, then you'll want to go to all fruits. You're going to go to denser fruit meals like bananas, mangoes, papayas. You can incorporate some dates. You can add avocados as a separate snack. You don't want to feed fruit with avocado because fat and fruit sugar do not digest well together. So feed the fruit meal early in the day, and then 4 to 6 hours later, you can give avocado as a treat. Also, as mentioned earlier, we want to stop feeding cooked foods if you are feeding any kind of cooked foods. Also, other things that could cause weight loss would be using herbs, mushrooms, CBD oil, any sort of treatment, any pharmaceutical drugs, any natural drugs. These are all toxic to the system and will result in chronic diarrhea, malabsorption, and weight loss. Another thing to keep in mind is that if digestion is not working well, we always want to keep our meals as simple as possible. Anytime I have a dog that is struggling with digestion, the first thing I do is I put them on just bananas, nothing else, only bananas. And we'll do banana meals until we get a good solid stool. After we get a solid banana stool, then we'll introduce additional fruits one at a time. I usually like to go with papaya, mango, melons, and then start adding some of the harder fruits like apples, which are a little bit more dense, a little bit harder for them to digest. Then, as long as you've got 3 or 4 fruits that digest well, then add the meat meal, starting with a small meat meal and increasing it a little bit each day until you've got good digestion within those feeding ranges, feeding percentages that you're looking to aim for. And lastly, consider free feeding. One of the things that we can do when we're not really sure about whether we're feeding the appropriate amount is to simply let our dogs decide for themselves how much they should be eating. So I will talk about free feeding in the next slide. Free feeding is where we allow our dogs to dictate how much they want to eat rather than serving them measured portions. We can do this either by handing our dogs one piece of a fruit at a time until they stop coming back, or by putting out a large platter of foods and letting them eat till full. Platter style free feeding, as you see in the video here, is a great opportunity for feeding a pack. It helps to build a strong pack dynamic. However, some downsides to feeding in this style would be if you have a food aggressive dog, you could end up with a fight. So you always want to use caution, especially in your first introduction of this way of feeding. Another potential issue is food waste, since you are going to be putting out large quantities of food that they may not completely eat. The purpose is for them to be able to fill to their desire. So you want to put a large enough quantity out that they're going to walk away before all the food is finished. However, most of the time your dog will come back and finish that a few hours later if there's a small amount left. And then you also need a suitable area to feed, preferably outside or on a patio, somewhere that's easy to clean up and that the dogs have enough space to spread out. And if you don't have the opportunity to do a platter style feeding, you can also do free feeding by hand feeding, which means you just fill up a bowl or a platter and bring it over to their usual feeding area, and then you hand out pieces of fruit one piece at a time. And this is a great way to free feed with a dog that doesn't know its own limits and is likely to eat so much that they'll throw up. If you feed them very slowly, giving them one piece at a time, their hunger signal will catch up eventually, and then they will turn their nose up at the last piece. The natural diet is very flexible and allows for us to have a wide range of options, but it also requires us to be flexible and to be willing and able to adjust on the fly. So, as we mentioned earlier, feeding percentages are within ranges and are flexible. You will adjust up and down based on whether you're feeding more meat days or fruit days, whether your dog is sedentary or active, and you may even adjust week to week based on your dog's activity level. If your dog has gone to the dog park 3 times this week, when they normally are sleeping on the couch, then you're going to want to give them a little bit more food that week because they burned through more calories. So just always try to keep that kind of common sense in mind. Sedentary dogs need less food than active dogs. Young dogs need more food than seniors. Seniors should be leaner than young dogs. It's okay for a senior to have a little bit of hip bone protruding as long as they're not constantly walking around foraging, looking for food. Dog park days, you want to make sure that you're not feeding a big meal before you go to the dog park. You don't want them running around on a full stomach because then that can lead to bloat. But after the dog park, they were going to be hungrier. So, a little bit of extra, maybe throw an extra banana in their meal, or you can give them a couple of dates as a snack after a fruit meal. But they're going to need a little bit more food versus the days where they're just hanging out at home. Again, same thing, sedentary days, a little smaller meal may be more suitable, especially if it's been rainy and you guys have been inside all week. So the important thing to remember is just don't get stuck in feeding exact percentages. With all of the percentages, they are a starting guideline. You can go up or down day to day and week to week as needed. If you're feeding more fruit than meat, then you want to go with a higher percentage. If you're feeding more meat than fruit, again, going with a lower percentage. So the more calories a food has, the smaller the portions they're going to need. So just keep all of those adjustments in mind. If you see that your dog's weight is dropping below, give them a little bit more food. If you see that their weight is hovering and you're not seeing the spine bones, you're not seeing the last 2 or 3 ribs, then you know that you need to cut it back just a little bit. Okay, and so lastly, we want to talk about troubleshooting when the body will not gain weight. So as we said earlier, there's a huge difference between weight loss due to fasting in a healing event versus starvation. However, healing can sometimes lead to drastic weight loss. Now, this type of weight loss will look more like the fasting dog, Emmy, and it will not look like the chronically starved dogs that we saw in those 3 slides. If your dog is looking like those starved dogs, then something's very wrong and we need to get that corrected. But sometimes dogs will get to that point where Emmy was, where you're seeing maybe 5 or 6 ribs, you're seeing a little bit of hip bone protruding, you're seeing a little bit of spine protruding, and even if you increase their food, they are just not gaining weight. If you increase their food, they might end up with diarrhea or vomiting. They're just not digesting the larger portions. If this happens, you may just need to be a little bit patient. So we always want to test first. So if your dog is getting skinny, you always want to increase those portions first. We want to give that test a few weeks. It can take a little bit of time for weight to gain, so we always want to give it a few weeks. But if you see that you increase from 6 to 8% and instead of getting weight gain, you're seeing more weight loss, or you're seeing diarrhea or vomiting or anything like that, then you need to bring those portions down and be a little bit patient. Let the body finish what it needs to finish in terms of cleaning, and the body will gain weight after the healing event is completed. These times should not last more than a few weeks to possibly 2 to 3 months. If it's lasting more than a couple of months, then you're more likely dealing with chronic underfeeding. And again, not a detox issue, but an issue of just not giving them enough food. One way that I always like to think about it in terms of healing is the burnt house analogy. If your house caught on fire, you would not just throw up fresh drywall and cover up those burnt beams. You would want to pull out all the burnt beams and replace all of that lumber. And then once you've rebuilt the structure, then you want to start to gain weight, start to put the drywall back in place in your house, start to hang the wallpaper and the paint. So when our body is cleaning and healing itself, sometimes the body wants to tear everything out before it rebuilds. So if your dog was dealing with chronic issues, long-term health issues, this could be more likely where they go through a period of chronic thinness. And in those narrow situations, you may just need to be patient. But again, always try to adjust the meals, always try to increase their meat days, always try to increase their portions, and just double check and make sure that they are getting enough to eat. Some signs that a dog is not getting enough to eat is barking, behavior issues, stealing from the trash can, constantly sniffing around, trying to eat sticks or dirt outside, sniffing or licking the walls or the carpet, chewing on things like blankets and toys. So any of those warning signs accompanied with weight loss or accompanied with them getting thin to the point where you can see those hip bones or you can see more than 3 ribs, those are all pretty good indicators that your dog is hungry and what they're doing is foraging. They're looking for food. Occasionally, it may seem counterintuitive, but the best option to get them to gain weight is actually to fast them. So if your dog is having chronic digestion issues, even when you have reduced their portions, a fast of a few days to a week will allow the digestive system to heal and eliminate mucus and eliminate those irritations and inflammation that is stopping the body from absorbing nutrients. So a fast of anywhere from 3 days to 10 days or potentially longer will allow that digestive tract to heal, and then when you refeed, their body will be able to absorb nutrients. So again, this is something that is much more rare, and if you have any questions about this, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to discuss, and we can go over your dog specific issues. I offer consultations on therawkey.com. So if you're struggling with any weight issues, if there's anything that we didn't cover here today, please reach out. And we also offer a free educational support group at facebook.com/groups/natural dog diet. And you can also find it by just going to Facebook and searching Natural Dog Diet, and you'll see it says Natural Dog and Cat Diet with therawkey.com. And that is our group. I'll also place the links in the description box below this video. And thank you so much for joining us and watching all the way to the end. If you found this video helpful, I hope you will subscribe to our channel, hit like, and share this with all your friends who have furry companions. Our goal is to eliminate canine and feline disease, and the only way we can do that is by educating owners. So please share and help us reach that vision. Have a great day, everybody.